Alright, what's going on everyone? In this series we're going to be exploring Nuxt by building a recipe application. This series is part of the Nuxt course that will teach you how to build modern applications using this framework. In the full course we're going to explore the basics of Nuxt, then move on to more advanced concepts, followed by building a larger full stack application using Nuxt and Supabase. And by the end of the course, you'll have knowledge of most features Nuxt has to offer and will be in a great place to start building your own applications using Nuxt. Now, the course is still in early access as only the first section is available, which will be this recipe application that we're going to be building in this series. So for a limited time, you can get the course for $39.99. By purchasing early, you'll gain access to the full series immediately, along with future sections that will be releasing consistently over the upcoming months. In addition, I'll also be making updates to this course to stay relevant as Nuxt 4 is just around the corner. So if you do want to purchase the course in early access, you can find that link down below in the description. Now before we jump into building applications with Nuxt, I want to do a quick overview of what Nuxt is. So Nuxt is a framework built on top of another framework called Vue, and it helps us to build modern applications using Vue.js. Now, since Nuxt is built on top of Vue, I am going to recommend that you have some knowledge of Vue itself before watching this course. I do have a full 2-hour course on Vue itself that will teach you all the basics of the framework and help make this course easier to understand, and you can find that link down below in the description. Now, you might be thinking, why don't we just use Vue.js since Nuxt is built on top of Vue? Well, Nuxt has several advantages out of the box that Vue alone does not provide. And one of the more notable features is something called universal rendering. Now, in a typical Vue application, everything is client-side rendered. What this means is that when you request a page on your application, the server will send back essentially an empty HTML file. Along with this, we also get a JavaScript bundle containing Vue. The browser will then run this JavaScript bundle, which then renders out your requested page. And every page requested after this initial one is going to occur on the client through this JavaScript bundle. The biggest disadvantage to client-side rendering is that it's not ideal for search engine optimization, and it can also take a little bit longer to load the page initially. The reason why it affects SEO is because search crawlers request pages on the server, and when they request pages that are client-side rendered, it's essentially just going to be an empty HTML file with nothing to crawl. Now, to fix some of the drawbacks of client-side rendering, we have something called server-side rendering. And how this works is it sends back a fully static rendered HTML file to the browser when you make your initial request. Along with this, we get a JavaScript bundle containing Vue. The browser will download and execute this file, which performs what is called hydration, which is going to implement Vue into your page to then make it interactive. And this approach will then allow search crawlers to properly index your site, since it will then be receiving the static HTML of that particular page. And also load times of the initial page will be a little bit quicker than client-side rendering. Now, although server-side rendering does address some of the drawbacks that client-side rendering has, server-side rendering can delay an application's interactivity and responsiveness, along with increasing the server load since each request requires the server to perform the rendering process for each request that it receives. Now, to get the advantages of both client-side and server-side rendering, Nuxt offers, as I mentioned, what is called universal rendering. So how universal rendering works is on the initial load of the application, the request is going to happen on the server. So what this means is that we're going to get back a fully rendered HTML file along with a JavaScript bundle that the browser will download and execute. And once the application has become hydrated, it's then going to work as a typical Vue single page application where all the pages then will get rendered on the client. And with this approach, we're going to get the benefit of our application being crawled properly and having quicker page load times on the initial load with server-side rendering, while also providing users with all the benefits of a client-side rendered application after the initial load. Now, universal rendering isn't the only advantage of using Nuxt. There's also file-based routing for easy route creation, great SEO support to make applications easily indexed for production, auto imports for all components and Vue's API, along with many other features that we're going to be exploring within this course. Alright, now to get started, the first thing that we want to do is start by installing Nuxt. Now for this course, I'm going to be using VS Code as my text editor. So with VS Code open, what we want to do is head over to the Nuxt documentation. And at the time of recording this course, we're currently on version 3.12. Now, Nuxt version 4 is just around the corner, and there are a few changes that will be happening. Many of these changes are minimal, and the fundamentals that we'll be learning throughout this course won't change with Nuxt 4. And since we'll be using version 3.12, we can opt into some of these changes happening within Nuxt version 4. And one of the more significant updates is going to be the new directory file structure, which we will be using for this course. Now, I will be making updates to the course when Nuxt 4 officially releases for those who purchase the full course. So what we want to do is click on Get Started, and if we scroll down just a little bit, you can see we have our options for installing Nuxt. Now, to keep it simple, we're just going to be using npm, so what we want to do is just copy this snippet, and then we want to head back over to our project inside VS Code, and then we can open up a new integrated terminal, and then we can paste in our snippet, and then we want to change our project name, so we're going to be creating a recipe app for this course, so we'll just say recipe-app like this, and then press enter. Now, the first prompt you're going to have is which package manager you like to use. So for this course, as I mentioned, we're just going to be using npm. Now, after that's finished, the next thing we can do is initialize a new Git repository, which we are going to do. And with that completed, you can now see inside of VS Code, we have our Nuxt project. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to cd into our folder or our Nuxt app, and then we want to spin up our local development server. So we can say cd, and we'll do recipe app. And then we want to run the command called npm run dev. And this is going to spin up our development server, and you can see it's going to be on port 3000. So if we click on this and go to our browser, you can see here we have our brand new Nuxt project created and running inside of our browser. Now, to help with this course, I'm going to recommend a few extensions for VS Code that I'll be using. First, you'll want to ensure that you have the official Vue extension installed. This was also known as Velar for those that may have used Vue in the past. Another great extension is Vue VS Code snippets. We'll be using this extension to assist with generating our Vue files template throughout the course. Lastly, since we'll be using Tailwind CSS for all the projects in this course, I recommend installing Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. This will provide you with features such as autocomplete for classes, syntax highlighting, and also hover preview of Tailwind classes themselves. So now that we have the Nuxt application built, the next thing that we're going to do is look at the directory structure of a Nuxt app. So right now, by default, this is the version 3 way of a Nuxt application. Now, as I mentioned, Nuxt version 4 is just around the corner. I don't have an official release date for this, but one of the more significant changes happening within Nuxt 4 is going to be to the directory structure of a Nuxt app. So what we can do with the Nuxt version 3.12 is we can opt into some of these Nuxt version 4 changes quite easily. So what I want to do for the sake of this video and keeping it as relevant as possible to changes happening with Nuxt version 4 is upgrade our directory structure to the version 4 way. So we can actually do this quite easily if we head over to the Nuxt documentation. And here inside of the Nuxt version 4 upgrade information, you can see that it was planned to be released on June 14th, and it is now well beyond that at the time of recording this video. However, as I mentioned, we can opt into testing some of these Nuxt 4 changes inside of version 3.12. And if we scroll down, we can see, as I mentioned, one of the more significant changes was going to be to the directory structure. As you can see, the impact level is quite significant. So we can actually change the directory structure quite easily. So how we can do this is we can automate this is by running this command right here from CodeMon to upgrade our file structure to the new version within Nuxt version 4. So what we can do is copy this and head back over to VS Code and paste this inside of our integrated terminal. And here inside of a new terminal, we're inside of our recipe app folder, we can just paste this command to upgrade to the version 4 file structure. So we're going to need to install the following packages, which is going to be CodeMon. So we just want to select Y for yes, and then hit enter. And once that's completed, you'll now see we have the new directory structure for version 4 of Nuxt. Now, since we really didn't have anything in here, the only thing that changed was instead of our app.vue being out here inside of the root directory, it now resides in a folder called app. And inside of this app directory, this is where you're going to create a lot of stuff like our components, our pages, and anything that's related to the more front end of our Nuxt application. And the biggest reason for this directory change within Nuxt version 4 was to separate the front end and the back end, where before everything kind of resolved in the root directory, but now all the front end stuff actually gets stored inside of this app directory. Now, in addition to that, we also have a few other directories. So at the very top, we have one called .nuxt, and Nuxt uses this directory in development to generate your Vue application. And if we expand this, you'll be able to see that there is a lot going on inside of this directory, but don't worry about knowing exactly what happens within this directory, as it's not really going to be important to being able to build an application with Nuxt. This is just going to give you a little bit more insight and allow you to learn about the files that Nuxt generates based on your directory structure. So next we have the public directory, and if you're coming from Nuxt 2 and you're watching this as a refresh, then you can also think of this as the static directory back within Nuxt 2. Now the public directory is going to be used to serve your website static assets. Now, any file served or stored inside of this public directory is going to be served at the root, and it's not going to be modified by the build process. Now, the last directory we have inside of the root is going to be the server directory, and this is where we're going to house our server routes to implement backend functionality into our Nuxt application. Now, we're not going to implement any server routes within this crash course. However, there will be a module within the full course where we'll cover server routes. And we'll also be using them in a few of the projects within the full course as well. Now, also inside of our root directory, we have a few files such as our git ignore, which is going to ignore some stuff by default that we don't want to push up to the Git repository. And we have our package.json, which is going to show you all the stuff that package-wise is installed within this particular project. And lastly, we have the nuxtconfig.ts, which this is going to allow you to configure your Nuxt application with a whole bunch of different options. Now, I won't be able to cover all the different options that you can configure within here, but if you head over to the Nuxt documentation, there is a section for the Nuxt configuration. And as you can see, there is a whole bunch of stuff that you can do and configure within your nuxtconfig.ts file. Now, there is one change that we'll need to make to our Nuxt configuration, and that is going to be setting our compatibility version to version 4. And the reason why we need to do this is because we did opt into the new file structure that is going to be available within Nuxt 4. So what we want to do is we want to copy this object for future, and then we want to head back over to our project. And where we have the compatibility date, we want to remove this and paste in the new future object with the compatibility version and set that to 4. Now, when we set the compatibility version to 4, this is going to enable all of the version 4 behavior. Now, we don't want that. The only thing that I want to enable that is from Nuxt version 4 is the new file directory structure. So inside of our Nuxt config, we can set all of the behavior to be back to Nuxt version 3 for some of the stuff that is changing. So for anything experimental, we want to set this back to version 3, and then also we have this unhead property with a change in here. So what we can do is copy all of this and head back over to our Nuxt config, and we can paste that in. So with this pasted in, we're going to disable anything that is experimental within Nuxt version 4, and this is going to allow us to use the new Nuxt version 4 file structure without having all of the experimental changes implemented into our Nuxt project. And as I mentioned, whenever Nuxt 4 does get officially released, I will come back throughout the course for anybody that has purchased it and make the necessary updates for anything that may have been broken or has changed from Nuxt version 3 to Nuxt version 4. Alright, so when looking back at the recording for this lesson, I realized that I made a mistake when we pasted in this future object containing the compatibility version, which we set to 4. So the error that we made is we actually removed something called the compatibility date, which is recommended. And this just simply sets a compatibility date for our application, and by default, when we created this app, it was set to April 3rd, 2024. So we just want to set that back here, and then we should be all set. Now, in the next lesson you're going to watch, this is actually removed, but in the lesson beyond that, we're going to have this added back to our Nuxt configuration. Now, when you're working on a project, there may be a time where you need to incorporate a package such as maybe Pinia for state management, or even Tailwind CSS for your styles. Now, when working with Nuxt, we are introduced to something called modules, and these modules are going to help you with incorporating these packages into your Nuxt app very easily, and these are all created by the Nuxt team and the community. So here on the Nuxt site, we have an integration section. We can click on modules, and we can see all the modules that are available to us, and there is a lot. And there's probably going to be one for any sort of use case or any sort of package you may need. And in this video or in this course, we're going to be using a few of these modules throughout our projects. So what I want to do is show you how easy it is to install one of these modules into our Nuxt application. Now for this particular project, which is going to be a recipe application, we're going to be using a few of Nuxt modules. The first one we're going to be using is the Tailwind CSS module. So this is going to allow us to add Tailwind to our project within seconds. So what we want to do is scroll down, and you can see the quick setup is going to be right here. So all we need to do is run this command. So we can copy this, and back inside of our terminal, we can just paste this command and we can hit enter, and that is going to easily install the Tailwind module for our Nuxt application. And with that installed, we now have a new property inside of our Nuxt config called modules. And this accepts an array, and within the array you pass as a string the module that you want to use. So in our case, we install the Nuxt Tailwind module like this. Now to see if everything is working, we can navigate over to our app.view file. And what we can do is right now, this is the technically root of our application. So everything is running through here. We don't have any pages or anything like that. So we can remove these two default components, which we're going to do anyways eventually, but we'll just do it now. And we can just add an H1 for the time being. So within here, we can just say hello. And then the test if Tailwind is working, we can apply a few Tailwind classes. So we can say text LG like this. And maybe we want to use the color class. We'll do text blue, and we'll just say 500. And now here inside of the application, you can see those Tailwind styles being applied. Now, if you still do see the default styles for the H1, then what you may want to do is just stop and restart your development server. Now, in addition to the Tailwind module, we're also going to be using a few others. So you can use the search bar to look for those other modules you want to use. So the first one's going to be Google Fonts. And for some reason, the documentation for installing it isn't available here, but we can head over to the site, which is google-fonts.nuxt.js.org, and we can copy the install command to get this. So it's very similar. It's going to be npx nuxt-latest module add and then the name of the module. So we can head back over to the app, open up our terminal, and we can just paste it in like this. And again, as you can see, I went ahead and added that automatically for us here to our modules array inside of our Nuxt config. And in addition to Google Font, we're also going to be using the Nuxt official icon library. And this is going to give us access to 200,000 plus ready to use icons from Iconify, which is my favorite way to add icons to any of my Vue and Nuxt projects. So if we scroll down, we can actually see this one has a command. So we'll copy that again, and then we can just paste that inside of our integrated terminal once more. And for the last module we're going to use, it's going to be the official Nuxt image module that is going to give us really good image optimization for our Nuxt application. So once more, we can scroll down. And again, this doesn't seem to have the actual install command. So we can probably go to the documentation, and then we can just click on the copy command here for that. Scroll back over, and we can just paste it in again. And that is all the modules that we're going to be using here for this recipe app. So as you can see, it's very easy to go ahead and add these packages to our Nuxt application via the Nuxt modules. Okay, so now that we have our modules installed, we want to do some configurations for these. So for Nuxt image and the Nuxt icon module, we aren't going to do anything for these as of right now. However, for the Google Fonts module and the Tailwind module, we want to do some configuration for these. So we want to pick out the Google font that we want to use for this project, as well as do some customizations to Tailwind. So let's start off by configuring the Google Fonts module. So here I have the documentation pulled up. So what we want to do is click on Get Started. And if we scroll down, you can see we have the documentation for how to set up the Google font using this module. And it's pretty simple. So we can just define inside of our Nuxt config the Google Fonts property, and then we can define another property called Families. And within here, you can see we have a few different ways that we can define a font family. So first off, we can define the entire font family and all of its weights by just specifying the font family. So for example, Roboto and setting that to a Boolean value of true, or we can pass an array and just specify the font weights that we want. And if we navigate over to the options, you can see we have a few different things we can also configure. So we have the families property, which we just looked at. We have the display property, which we can set the display to swap, auto, block, fallback, or optional. We have subsets, and we have a whole bunch of different things we can configure. But for the sake of this video and keeping it very simple, we're just going to be defining the font family. So in our Nuxt config, what we want to do is we want to define the Google Fonts property. And then within here, we just want to define the families property. And for this recipe app, we're going to be using the font family of Montserrat. And to keep this simple, once again, we're just going to enable all the different font weights so we can set this to be true. And that's going to give us access to every single font weight for the font family of Montserrat. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make some customizations to Tailwind. So we need to create what is called a Tailwind config file. And the easiest way to create one of these is if we go inside of our integrated terminal and we can run the command npx, and then we want to say tailwind init. And once you run that command, you should now see inside of our directory we have our tailwind config.js. So the first thing that we'll want to do is configure this content array. And what this content array is going to do is we need to specify where we want Tailwind to look for the classes that we're using within our Vue application. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in from the completed project. So if you want to, you can head down below in the description if you're watching this on YouTube or inside of the course details, a link to the GitHub repository for this course. And you can head over to the tailwind config.js and then you can just paste or copy and paste this in, as well as all the other configuration that we're going to be doing here for this Tailwind config file. Now to modify the default theme of this Tailwind project, we can do this inside of this theme object. Now you'll also see we have an additional object within here called extend. Now we're going to be providing some default colors or custom colors that we're going to be using for this recipe application. And we'll want to put those inside of the extend because if we were to put those inside of the theme object outside of the extend, this is going to overwrite all the default colors that Tailwind has, and we don't want that. We want to keep those. We just want to add some custom ones. So what you do is you put those inside of the extend property. So we'll just unpaste that and then paste it inside of here. Now outside of the extend property, but still within our theme property, we want to define a custom font family that we're going to be using for this Tailwind project. So how we do this is we want to define the font family property, which is an object, and then we can define the font that we want. So we need to give this a name, which we're going to call Monostrat, and then we're going to set this to Monostrat with a backup of sans serif. Now, the last thing that we're going to customize within our Tailwind config is going to be for the container class. Now, if you're familiar with Tailwind, you might know that whenever you use the container class, you also have to use the class of mxauto to center the contents because by default, with Tailwind, the container class does not have margin on the left and right. However, we can set this within the Tailwind config, so we don't need to use that class. So what we want to do is reference a container property, and then we can set the property within here of center to true, and this will be like adding the class of mxauto, so it'll apply margin on the left and right for us without having to use that additional class. And we'll also add some default padding on the left and right for our container class, and we're going to set that to the value of 2 rem or 32 pixels. Now to demonstrate the changes we made are working, here inside of our app.vue file, which right now is the main entry point for this Nuxt application, let's apply a few of the classes that we modified and also created. So let's apply the font family of Monostrat. So how we do that is we use the class of font, and you can see at the very top here we have the IntelliSense, we have the font Monostrat because inside of our config we gave it the class name of Monostrat or the property of Monostrat. So that correlates to using font dash and then the name we specified. And then we can also add our container. And here inside of the application, you can now see we have our container class being applied and everything is within the center. And we also have the padding on the left and right. And you can also see our font family of Monostrat is also being applied. All right, so now that we have everything set up and ready to go, let's start learning about Nuxt itself. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is how to create pages within a Nuxt application. So as I mentioned a few times already throughout this course, the app.vue file is going to be the main entry file, very similar to how we have the app.vue file within a normal Vue project. Now, when using Vue, if you wanted to create a new page, or I guess you can call it a route, what you would do is you would create a views folder and then create your view, and then you would head over to your router file and you would create that route that connects to that component. Now within Nuxt, it works a little bit different and it's actually a little bit easier. So Nuxt works on what is called file-based routing. So to show you how this works, what we can do is inside of our app folder, we want to create a new folder and we want to call this pages. Now within this pages folder or directory, we want to create our new page. So we want to create our home directory or our home page. So what we can do is within this pages folder, we want to create a new file called index.vue. And within this file, we can use our extension we have called Vue VS Code snippets, and we can use the command vbase 3 setup, and we want to use a TypeScript version. Now we're going to be using Tailwind, so we don't need to have our style tag. And then what I like to always do is I like to have my script tag on top of my template, and that is just my personal preference. Now inside of our template, we have a div. So for now, let's just add an h1 and we'll just call this home page like this. Okay. So now if we head over to our application, you can see that we're on the home route, but we still see our hello message, which is coming from the app.view. Now, the reason why we're not seeing our homepage content and we're still seeing this hello message is because Nuxt does not know we have other pages inside of our application. So in order to display those pages we have inside of our pages directory, we need to use a component that they provide to us called Nuxt page. Now, one thing that you're going to notice is that whenever we use a component within Nuxt, whether it be one they're providing to us, such as the Nuxt page component, or one of our own components that we build later throughout this course, we don't need to import these as we did within Vue. Nuxt actually is going to auto import all components for us, which in my opinion is a really nice thing. So essentially this Nuxt page component is just a wrapper of the router view component that we have when we build applications with Vue 3 and the Vue router. So now that we have this imported into our app.view, any page that we navigate to that exists inside of our pages directory will now see within our application. So with this implemented, you can see now inside of our application, since we're on the home directory or the root, we see the value of homepage. So with file-based routing, how this works is under the hood, whenever we create a new page inside of our pages directory, a new route is also created for that under the hood by Nuxt. So in this example, we had a index.view page. So what this correlates to is just going to be the route of slash. So for example, if we were to create a page such as about.view, then that route would be created for us automatically, and then the route would be /about. But since we don't have an about page created right now inside of our application, if we do attempt to navigate to the about page, we're going to get a 404 page not found error. Now, when you're building an application, there may be a time where you want to have a different layout for a particular page. Now, say for example, on the left, we have our main pages where we have a navigation, our content, and our footer. And we can think of the content as the Nuxt page and then the navigation and footer on all of our pages. So say for example, we want to have our login page not have the navigation and the footer. So if we were using Vue, then we would have to probably get the route that we're on, and we have to use some conditional rendering to not show the navigation or footer if it is that particular route. Now with Nuxt, this gets a little bit easier because we're introduced to something called layouts. And layouts are going to simplify this process where we don't have to do any conditional rendering. We can just define what layout we want for that particular page. Now to set up layouts, what we want to do is we want to wrap our Nuxt page inside of the Nuxt layout components. So what we can do is highlight this, and we can use emit wrap with abbreviation, and we can say Nuxt layout like this to wrap our Nuxt page inside of the Nuxt layout component. And then inside of our app folder, we want to create a new folder for our layouts. So we'll do new folder and we'll call this layouts. And we want to have a default layout. So inside of our layouts folder, we can create a new file and we'll just call this defaults.view. And then within here, we can just use our vbase syntax to create our Vue boilerplate. So we'll say vbase 3 setup. So we can just remove the style tag and then we can save that. And again, like I said, I like to have the script tag above my template. And then within this div, what we want to do is we want to pass a slot. Now, the reason why we want to do this is because essentially what happens is this Nuxt page becomes the slotted content for our layout. And inside of our default layout, if we just add an H1 and we say default layout like this, and we save that, if we head over to the application, you can see we're going to see that text of default layout. So how layouts work, if you don't define a layout for a particular page, then it's going to default to our default layout by default. Now, for example, if we had a different layout, so if we go into our layouts folder and we create one, and we can just call this login.view because that was kind of the example we were looking at. And then we can create our template. And within our login layout, remember we want to pass our slot so that it can get the page content. And again, just to demonstrate how this works, we can add an H1 and we can just do login layout like this. And here inside of our index.view, which is our main page that we have, to set a different layout other than the default, what we can do is we can use a macro that is provided to us by Nuxt called define page meta. And this accepts an object, and if we define a layout property, we can define the name of the layout. So in this case, we either have our default or we can use our login. So if we set this to login and we save that and head over to the application, and we refresh this, you can now see that instead of using the default layout, we're now using the login layout. And circling back to the example that we had at the beginning of this lesson, hopefully you can see how layouts can be used. So for example, the one we had on the left could be considered our default layout, and then the one on the right can be considered our login layout. So we can easily display different types of components or different types of text or content within these layouts, and we can change them really easily by using the define page meta macro and defining the layout that we want. But remember, if you don't define this define page meta macro with a layout, it's going to use the default layout by default. Now, when building out components within a Nuxt application, it's nearly identical to how we would build out components within a Vue application. The only nice thing that we have with components within Nuxt is that these components, when we use them, are going to be auto-imported for us in the pages that we use them in. Now, the first component that we're going to be building is going to be for our navigation. So inside of our app folder is where we're going to store our components. So what we want to do is within our app folder, we want to create a new folder, and we can call this components. And within this components folder, let's create a new file for our navigation, and we'll just call this base navigation.vue. And inside of this component, we want to start off by generating our Vue template, so we can say vbase3-ts setup. Now, as we begin to build out this application, I'm going to bypass writing out the markup and the style, so that way we can focus on the core concepts of Nuxt itself. Alright, so here on GitHub, I have the repository pulled open for this application. And what you're going to want to make sure is you're on the branch called instructional code. Now, as I mentioned, I want to focus more on the core concepts of Nuxt. So what I did on this branch specifically is I ripped out all of the Nuxt core features from the completed project. So that way we're just copying and pasting in the raw HTML and CSS from Tailwind, and we're going to focus more on implementing those core Nuxt features. So what we want to do is we want to copy this entire header tag from this base navigation component, and we want to paste it within ours here inside of our Nuxt application. Now inside of this component, we're going to be using an image for the icon, and that icon is going to be located inside of our public folder. And as of right now, we don't have that inside of our repository. So we want to head back over to GitHub, and then we can come to the public folder. And for this project, we're going to have two assets. We're going to have the icon and also an image for the hero. So for now, we can just download the icons. We can click on this, and then we can just download that and then add it to our public folder. And now that we have this image inside of our public folder, we should have everything we need to properly display this base navigation component inside of our application. So what we want to do is we want to navigate over to our layouts, and then we have our default layout. And then what we want to do is we can remove this H1. And then what we want to do is on every page that has the default layout, we want to display our base navigation component. So what we can do is above our slot, we can insert our base navigation component just like this. And then remember, because we are using Nuxt, we don't have to import that in the script. Nuxt is going to take care of that for us automatically. Now, before we preview that, one modification that we need to make is within our app.vue file. So a few lessons ago, we added this container class, which is now wrapping all of our pages within our Nuxt application, which we don't want. We want to add this container class on a page basis. So we just want to remove this here from the app.vue file. And now here inside of our application, you can now see we're properly displaying our base navigation component. Now within this navigation component, we want to be able to navigate to different pages within our Nuxt application. So as of right now, we have two locations where we want to do some navigation, and those are represented by these anchor tags. And for the sake of demonstrating how to navigate inside of this application, we're also going to be adding another page, which is going to be an about page. So we can just duplicate down this list item within our UL, and then we can just change this to about. And for our about page, we need to create a page inside of our pages folder. So we can create a new file, and we can call this about.vue, and then we can just scaffold out our Vue template. And now that we have our template all set up, we can head over to GitHub, and we can copy and paste in the markup that we're going to need for this about page. So we can head over to the pages folder, we can select on about, and then we just want to copy in this main tag and then paste that in here inside of our about page. Now, to navigate between pages within a Nuxt application, it's pretty similar to how you would do it within Vue. Now, instead of using the router link component, we use something called NuxtLink, and essentially this is just a wrapper of the router link component. So for this first list item, let's convert this to use the NuxtLink component. So we can remove the A and the href, and we can say Nuxt link like this. Now to navigate to a certain page, we can use what is called the to prop. So we can say to and set this equal to, and we just want this to navigate to the home page, which we can just say slash. And we can do the same thing for the about page. So let's remove the href and the anchor tag, and we can replace this with a NuxtLink component. And then we can set the to prop on here to be slash about, because as you recall with file-based routing, it goes to the route that is associated with the page name. So for the home page, which is indexed, it's just going to be slash. And then for the about page, since we called it about, it's going to be slash about. And lastly, we just want to convert our logo to link up to our homepage when you click on this. So again, we're going to replace the anchor tag and the href with a NuxtLink component. And then this is just going to navigate to the homepage. So we'll say to, and then we'll just say slash. And now back here inside of the application, and I'm going to zoom in really quickly to make this a little bit easier to see. If we select on either our home tag or about, we can see we're going to get navigated to the about page that we just created. And if we click on home, that's going to navigate us back to our home page. And if we go back to the about page and we click on our logo, that is also going to navigate us back to our home page. And if we open up the inspect menu, you can see that for the current active route, we're going to have the classes such as router link active and router link exact active, which is what we would normally have when we were using the router link tag for the current active route. So you can use these classes to then style the active route here inside of the application accordingly. Now, having good performance on your application is an important part to making it successful. Now, oftentimes one thing that can cause performance issues are images, as images tend to take up a lot of data that a user has to download. And if there's a lot of data that you need to download on a certain page, that can impact your pages or application's performance. And one way that we can improve the performance of images within our Nuxt application is using a component that is provided to us by the Nuxt image module that we installed a few lessons ago into our Nuxt application. So within our base navigation component, we have an image that is being hard-coded to a width of 56 pixels. So if we head over to the application and we go to inspect this, and then we can select on this icon, you can see that yes, it is being set to a width of 56 pixels, but if we hover over to the image itself, the rendered size is 56 pixels, which we're seeing in our application, but the intrinsic size is actually 512 pixels by 512 pixels. So what we're doing is having the user download all that extra data, even though we're only showing them a very small size of that image. And right now, we're not going to see a performance issue with this because number one, we only have the one image on our application as of right now, and the file size is already really small. But the issue that we want to look into deeper here is if we have an application, which we will, that has a lot of images in which we're doing this, we could be saving a lot of data that the user has to download and improve the application's performance. So with the Nuxt image module, we get access to a component called Nuxt image, which is a drop-in replacement for the native image tag that we would normally use to display images inside of an application. Now, under the hood, this component is going to do a few things. So first off, it's going to convert the SRC to provider optimized URLs. So as you can see, we can use a whole bunch of different providers with the Nuxt image component, which we're not going to be showcasing here in this course, but we can also use the default provider, which is called IPX. And IPX is the built-in and self-hosted image optimizer that Nuxt uses for the Nuxt image component. And when using either IPX or one of the providers, we can automatically resize our images based on a width and height prop. And what's also really nice about this component is we can also generate responsive sizes for our images. So as you can see, when we use the Nuxt image tag, we use it as if it was a normal image tag. We just have the Nuxt image component, it accepts an SRC, and this is going to result in just an image tag being rendered inside of our application. And with the example that we have right now, which is going to be for our icon, we can specify a specific width and height of the image using the width and height property. However, we can also specify responsive sizes for images that may grow or shrink to respond to certain screen sizes within our application. And as you can see on the right-hand side here, we have a lot of other props that we can use to help optimize our images using this component. So I'll leave the link down below in the description to go check out the documentation for Nuxt image, as it does offer a lot of good insight in terms of how we can optimize our images using all these additional props. So for our icon that we have in our navigation component, what we want to do is replace the native image tag with the Nuxt image component. And then what we want to do is remove this class of W14, and we want to use the width property to set this to 56 pixels. And now back inside of our application, if we select on this icon, you can see that the image tag now looks a little bit different. So you can see that we have the width prop of 56 pixels right here. And then for the SRC value, it's actually being set to an optimized URL using IPX, which is the built-in default image optimizer for Nuxt image. So you can see that the intrinsic size is now 112 pixels by 112, and the file size has been reduced to 3.7 kilobytes. So that is almost 4 or 5 kilobytes smaller than what we had before. So as you can see, if we optimize our images correctly, we can reduce significantly the amount of data that the user is going to download when they visit our application. Now for this image, what you may have noticed is that we have something called the SRC set. And within here, we have two different URLs for our image. So we have one that says W_56, which stands for width 56. And then we have another one that says W_112 for width 112. And then on the end of these, we have a 1x and a 2x. And for the SRC value of this image, you can see it is using the W_56 icon green URL. However, if we were to open this image in a new tab, if we right-hand click on this, and we click on open a new tab, you can see that it's using the W_112 URL, even though here it's saying that it should be using the W_56. So you might be wondering what is happening. Now the Nuxt image has something called the densities prop. And what this does is generate a special version of the image for screens with an increased pixel density. And by default, what this does allow for is a 1x image and also a 2x image for increased pixel density for screens that can support it. And I do believe I'm on a screen size that does have an increased pixel density, so that's why you're seeing the width of our image double from what we specified. So what we can do to show you how this works if you don't want to do something like this is we can copy this densities prop, and we can add this prop to our Nuxt image component, and we can remove the 2x density. So if we save this and we head back over to our application, you can now see that we no longer have that 2x density image, and we only have the default one that we have specified, which is going to be the 1x, which is going to result in a 56 by 56 image for our icon. And now if you open up this image inside of a new tab, you should see that instead of it being the 112 by 112, we now have the 56 by 56 icon that we specified. Now another useful prop that the Nuxt component has is called the format prop. And this allows you to serve your image in a specific format. So on the fly, it allows you to convert your image to a different format such as WebP, JPEG, JPG, GIF, and SVG. Now in our case, our icon is actually a PNG. So say for example, we wanted to convert it to be a WebP because WebP formats are a little bit more web performant friendly. Now before we convert this image, let's just take a quick look at the file size, which is going to be 2 kilobytes, which is very small. But when we do convert a PNG to a WebP, we're also going to save on data that the user has to download, making our application even more performant. So on the Nuxt image component, we can specify the format prop, and we can just say we want this to be the format of WebP. So now if we save that and head back over to the application, you can see that our image has been converted over to the type of WebP, and we also are able to shrink our file size by 0.5 kilobyte. Now with the Nuxt image component, we have the ability to specify responsive sizes for our images, which is something that you'll more commonly do when building out applications. Now in the previous lesson, we took a look at how to use the Nuxt image component with a static image with our icon. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look at integrating a hero section which has a hero image in which we want to have responsive sizes for. Now back inside of our Nuxt application, we're going to go to the index page, which is where we're going to integrate this hero section. So what we want to do is remove the content that we have, and we're going to create a main tag. Then over on the GitHub repo, make sure that you're still under the instructional code branch. We're going to grab this first section, which contains our hero. So we can copy this, and then we can just paste it into our main tag here inside of our index.view. And back inside of the GitHub repo, if you haven't done this already, we want to head back to our public folder, and we want to grab this hero icon, which is called nuxtCourseHero.png. So we can click on this, and then we just want to download this. And now that we have our image located inside of the public folder for this hero section, if we head over to the Nuxt application, you should now see the hero being displayed inside of our app. So for the hero image, again, we want to swap out the native image tag for the Nuxt image component. And what we're also going to do for this image is we're going to apply the densities prop. So that way we don't have the increased pixel density for this image. So all we want to do for this is say x1. Now to make our image responsive for different screen sizes, we can use the sizes prop with the Nuxt image component. And this accepts a space separated list of screen size and width pairs. And if we select on this link, we can see a list of all the screen sizes that the Nuxt image component uses. And what's really nice about this is that it shares the same naming and sizes as the Tailwind CSS library, and they even added an additional breakpoint for extra small. Now the Nuxt image documentation has a pretty good example of how this sizes prop works. So the initial value you can see is going to be 100 VW, which is 100% of the viewport width available. So the image will stay at that size until it reaches the breakpoint that we have set, which is going to be small. Now the small breakpoint by default with the Nuxt image component is 640 pixels. So once you get to that breakpoint, it's now going to be 50% of the viewport width available at 640 pixels. So the image will now be 320 pixels wide. And then once it reaches the medium breakpoint, it's going to be set to a fixed value of 400 pixels. Now the image that we have for the hero section is going to be fine in its full size. However, once we get down to smaller screens, so if we go to inspector application, you can see that the image is now going to be much smaller, and it's going to get even smaller as we get down to a smaller screen size. So as you can see, the rendered size for this image is almost half the size of the intrinsic. So what we can do is use the sizes prop on the Nuxt image component to render out a smaller version for users that are on mobile, and then we can render out the full version, which is going to be the intrinsic size for users that are on tablet and desktop. So on the component, we can start off by defining our sizes prop. So the first thing we want to define is going to be our extra small breakpoint. So we can say XS, and this works very similar to when we define our media queries or breakpoints with Tailwind, where we can specify the LG and then we can apply the class. So it works very similar to that. And for the extra small breakpoint, we want to define a value of 100 VW. And this is going to make the intrinsic size of the image be 320 pixels wide. And it'll stay this way until it reaches the next breakpoint that we define. Otherwise, it'll always stay at this width. And here inside of our application, you can see that the intrinsic size, no matter how big our screen gets, is only going to be a maximum of 320 pixels wide. And if we were to open this up in a new tab, you can also see that as well. Now, as you may be able to see, the image right now on the desktop version looks a little bit grainy, and that's because the intrinsic size is a lot smaller than what the image is being rendered out at. So what we can do is define an additional breakpoint and render out our image to be much larger at a certain breakpoint. So what we're going to do is define the small breakpoint, which is 640 pixels wide. So if we take a look at our image, down at the bottom, you can see the dimensions are 667 pixels wide and 550 pixels tall. Now, since the size of our image is roughly the same size of the small breakpoint, which is 640 pixels, we could set the value at the small breakpoint to be 100 VW, or 100% of the viewport width available. Or what we could do is render out the exact width of the image, since we know it's 667 if we want it to be exact, which I think is what we're going to do. So instead of setting this to be 100 VW, we'll set this to be 667 pixels. And if we take a look at the images here inside of our elements, you can see we have the one rendered out at 320 pixels, and we also have the additional one rendered out at full size. And again, if we wanted to, we could also make this format to be a WebP to make our images even more performant. So let's also do that. So we'll change the format to be WebP. And with that change made, you're not going to notice a difference in the quality, but with the image itself, you can see that the file size will have been reduced significantly, which again is going to reduce the amount of data that the user needs to download when visiting your application. Therefore, it's going to improve your application's performance. Alright, so the next thing we're going to take a look at is how to fetch data in a Nuxt application. Now, data fetching is one of the most common things we do when building out an application. And to assist with data fetching, Nuxt uses the useFetch library, which gets exposed as a fetch utility to help make HTTP requests. Nuxt also provides two composables called the useAsyncData and useFetch to assist with fetching our data. The reason why Nuxt provides these composables instead of just using the fetch utility is to prevent data from being fetched twice. We learned early on in the course that Nuxt runs on universal rendering, where the initial render happens on the server, and once the application becomes hydrated, all the rendering happens on the client. On this initial load, if you were to use the fetch utility to fetch your data, then you may end up fetching it twice. So to prevent this behavior from happening, Nuxt created these two composables. Once the request to fetch the data happens on the server, these composables then forward the payload to the client instead of refetching the data once the application becomes hydrated. Now the useAsyncData and useFetch composable are nearly identical. They both do the same thing and they help us fetch data within our Nuxt application. useAsyncData accepts a unique key as the first argument, a function handler as a second, and then the third optional parameter is for some options. And within the function handler, what we can do is use the fetch utility to then make our API request. Now useFetch essentially does the same thing, except it's a shorthand for the most basic usage. So instead of passing a key and a function handler, you can just pass in the endpoint, and you also have the option to pass in some options. And when we make these requests using these composables, we get a few items returned back which we can then destructure. So as you can see in this example, we get back data, status, and error, which are all returned as view refs. So to use or access this content within our script, we'll need to access these by appending .value on the end of them. Now, in addition to those, we also get back a few functions to refresh the data as well as clear it. And in the next lesson, we'll start to work with some of these return values. So for the most part, when fetching data, we can mainly opt to use a shorthand useFetch. However, there are times where the data fetching might be a bit more complex, or you may need to fetch your data from a third-party service like Supabase, and in those cases, you can then opt for the useAsyncData composable. And throughout this course, we'll be using both of these composables, as well as a handful of the options that are available for them. Alright, so now that we have a basic understanding of how data fetching works within Nuxt, let's begin to fetch some data to populate our application. Now to populate this application with recipes, we're going to be using the dummy JSON API, and they have an endpoint to retrieve recipes. So what we want to do is copy this endpoint to get all the recipes, and back within our index.view file, which is where we want to retrieve these recipes, inside of our script we either want to use the useFetch or useAsyncData composable to fetch our recipes. Now for the sake of learning purposes, I'm going to show you how we can use both of these composables to fetch our data. So first off, let's start off with the useAsyncData composable. So we'll want to create a new variable, and we can destructure the response. So the two things that we're going to be using for this tutorial are going to be the data and then also the error. So we'll want to set our variables equal to the useAsyncData composable like this. And remember, this accepts a few parameters. Now the first one's going to be a unique key, so we can just call this recipes. And the second thing that we want to pass is going to be our function handler. Now inside of here, or in this function, what we want to do is we just want to use our fetch utility, and then we want to paste in that URL we copied a few moments ago from the dummy JSON to get all the recipes. Now one thing we also want to do is, because by default this API endpoint is going to return back 30 recipes, we don't need that many, so we want to limit this. So we can do question mark and do limit and set this equal to 12. And we also want to await this to finish before we render out the page. So in front of the composable itself, we can use the keyword of await. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention since we added our await keyword to our composable is that under the hood, Nuxt actually uses view suspense component. And what this does is it waits for all the asynchronous tasks to finish before navigating to that particular page. Now, to view the response that we get from our API, you may be tempted to log this out within the console, which we could in fact do. However, there's a much better way to view the response from our API with a module that gets installed when we create our Nuxt project called the Nuxt DevTools. And within the Nuxt configuration file, you may have noticed that we have this property called DevTools, and this property accepts an object, and within here we have another property called enabled, and this is set to true, and this enables the Nuxt DevTools, which are going to provide you a lot of insight into your Nuxt application. Now to access the Nuxt DevTools, you may have noticed on the bottom of our browser we have this Nuxt logo, so when we hover over it and we click on the Nuxt icon, this is going to bring up the Nuxt DevTools. Now we're not going to be doing a deep dive into these within this particular lesson, but what I want to show you is how we can access the payload within the DevTools. So on the side we have a whole bunch of different tabs, and the one we want to look for is going to be the payload tab, which is right here. So if you select on this, you can see that we have our key that we gave it called recipes. So if we expand this, you can see we have our response from our API. So we have all of our recipes inside of this array, and then we have a few other things that get returned within that API request. Now, not only does this tooling give you a very nice way to visually see your API response, it also does something pretty cool. So on the right-hand side of our recipes, we have a few options, and one of them is to generate a data schema. So if we select on this, you can see it's going to provide us a schema for properly typing out this response and also the recipe. So we have an interface called recipes, which is going to be for the API response. And we also have an interface for the recipe itself, which we'll be using both of these to properly type out things within our application. So now that we have seen our request is working properly, as I mentioned, I wanted to show you how we could use both the useAsyncData composable and the useFetch composable to fetch our recipes. So beneath the useAsyncData composable, let's fetch our data using useFetch. So what we'll do is we'll create another variable, which we'll just structure, and then again, we'll get out the data and then the error, and then we want to set this equal to await, and then we want to use the useFetch composable. And we'll just want to copy the API endpoint that we have inside of our fetch utility, and then paste it in as the first parameter here inside of the useFetch composable. And this is all that we need to do when using the useFetch composable. So as you can see, it's going to be a little bit simpler for the basic usage when fetching data inside of a Nuxt application. And for this project, since we're just going to be doing basic data fetching, we can opt to use the shorthand or the useFetch composable to fetch our data. So we can just go ahead and remove the useAsyncData composable. So now that we have our recipe data fetch, we'll want to use this data to populate our UI with recipes. So what we're going to do is head over to the GitHub repo, and we're going to go to our index page, and we want to copy this section right here with all the markup for our recipe card. So we can copy this, and then we can paste this below the section for our hero inside of our index.view file. Now within this markup that we pasted in, we have this div right here, which is going to act as our grid container for laying out all of the recipe cards. And within this grid container right now, we just have a sample for the recipe card that we're going to be populating with our recipe data. So what we want to do is you want to create a recipe card for each recipe that we have in our recipes array. So how we can do that is by using what is called the v-for loop. And what this allows you to do is iterate over an array, and for each item that is within that array, we can generate a block of content. So for each recipe that we have in that recipe array, we can generate the markup for our recipe card. So on our div for the recipe card, we just want to add the v-for directive. Now what the v-for directive accepts is going to be a param, and then we want to indicate the array that we want to iterate over. So for the param, we'll call this recipes, and then we want to say in, and then we want to reference our data, and then we want to say .recipes. And here inside of our application, you can now see we have 12 of these recipe cards being generated because we have 12 within our recipes array. Now, as you'll see right now, because we are using TypeScript within this file, we're going to have an error that says data is a type of unknown. So what we want to do before we go any farther with populating our UI is ensure that we have everything typed properly. So what we want to do is within our recipe app folder, we want to create a new folder, and we'll call this types. And within this folder, we'll just create a new file called types.ts. Now back inside of the application, we can gain access to these types by selecting on the Nuxt DevTools, and then we can look at our payload, and then we can select on the generate data schema, and you can see we have the interfaces right here. So what we can do is we can copy these, and then we can head back over to our application and we can paste these in. And we'll just want to make a few changes. So first off, let's change the interface name to recipe response like this. And then for the difficulty, we'll just change this to be a string. Now to use these inside of our file, we're going to need to import them. So we'll say import, and then we'll do our type, and this is called recipe response, and this is going to be located inside of our types folder. And once we have that imported, all we want to do is assign this type to our useFetch composable. And now as you can see, the error has changed to be that data is possibly undefined. So to fix this, we can use the optional chaining operator, which is going to be question mark, to say that this might be undefined, and that should fix our TypeScript error. Now that everything is properly typed out, we can begin to populate our recipe card with the recipe data. So the first thing I want to do is for the param we call the recipes, we just want to have this be recipe. So how the v-for loop works is we can use our recipe param to access all the information about that particular recipe. So for example, we have this image tag, which we're going to want to convert to be using the Nuxt image component. So we'll update the native image tag to use the Nuxt image component like this. Now, what we want to do is for the source of this, we want to reference our recipe param. So we'll say recipe like this. And because we have everything properly typed, we should now see all the different properties we have on this param. So what we want to do is select the image. And then just to save some time, I'm going to paste in the remaining properties that we want to add to this component. So for the sizes, we're going to have an extra small breakpoint with 100 VW, a small breakpoint of 50 VW. And then once we get to the large screen, we're going to set this image to be 400 pixels. We're also going to change the format to be WebP, and then we're going to set the density to be 1x. And then as you'll be able to see inside of the application, we now have all those images being displayed for our recipe cards. Now, if we take a look at one of the images that we have using the Nuxt image component, you can see we do have all the URLs being properly formatted for our different breakpoints. However, if you look at the intrinsic size, you can see that they are all 1000 by 1000, and they're not being converted to what we had set them to within the Nuxt image component. Now, the reason why these aren't being transformed is because in the previous image that we transformed, they were all local to our project. Now, these images are coming from the dummy JSON API, so what we need to do is let the Nuxt image component know that we can transform images from this specific domain. Now, to configure this, what we can do is inside of the Nuxt config file, we can define the image property for the Nuxt image component, and then we can define a property called domains, which accepts an array. And then as a string, we can pass in our domain, which is going to be this right here. And this will allow us to transform images coming from this domain. So if we save this and take a look inside of our application now, you can see these are properly being transformed. Now for the remainder of a recipe card, we want to replace all the static text with data from our recipe param. So first off, we have the recipe name. So what we want to do is we want to replace this, and we're going to use much test syntax. And we want to reference our param of recipe, and then we want to access the property called name. And for the remaining three that we need to update to speed things up, I'm just going to copy and paste those in. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention is that this is the first file that we're going to be using the Nuxt icon module in. Now, how this module works is there is a component called icon. Now, this component is automatically imported for us, as all components within Nuxt are, and it accepts a mandatory or required prop called name. And how this prop works is we first want to define the library that this icon is from, followed by the icon name. Now, over on Iconify, they make this very easy to implement. So once you find the icon that you want to use, you can just select on it from within the list. And we're going to have a nice pop-up which gives us a lot of information on how we can implement this icon. So as you can see, they have a whole bunch of different components, but the first option is going to be view. And then all we want to do is we can just copy the whole component and paste it into our Nuxt application. Now, the only thing that we're going to have to change ourselves is that since we are using the Nuxt icon module, instead of it accepting the icon prop, we just want to update this to name. Now, back inside of our application, if we take a look, we should now have our recipe cards fully populated with all the correct information. Now that we have our recipe cards created, the next thing that we want to do is create an individual page for each one of these recipes. Now to do this, we're going to be creating a route that has a param, and the param is going to contain the ID of that specific recipe. So what we want to do is within our pages directory, we want to create a new folder, and we're going to call this route recipes. And then within this route, we just want to create a new file. And then how we can define a route with a param is using brackets. So inside of the bracket, we can name our param, and we're going to call this param ID, and then we just want to say .view to create our view file. And then we'll just want to create our view boilerplate. Now back inside of our index.view file where we have our recipe cards, what we want to do is convert our button to be a NuxtLink component. So that way when we click on the view button, it takes us to that new individual recipe page that we're creating right here. So let's convert our button to a NuxtLink component. So we'll say NuxtLink like this, and then we need to add our self-closing tag. For some reason, I didn't want to do that. And then on the NuxtLink component, remember to navigate to a particular route, we want to add what is called the toProp. Now the toProp is going to be dynamic because we want to reference that ID property on each recipe whenever we select on the view button on that particular recipe. So what we want to do is you want to insert some backticks, and then we want to say /recipes. And then to reference our ID, what we want to do is use the money sign and brackets. And we want to reference our recipe param. and then we want to reference the ID property. Okay, so now if we save that and head back to our application and we select on one of our view buttons, you can see it's going to take us to the route of recipes, and then we have the ID of 2. And if we go back and we select on another one, this one, for example, should be 3. Now back inside of our recipes file, what we want to do is fetch data that is associated to the ID that is being passed in that particular route. So the first thing that we need to do is gain reference to that particular ID. Now to gain access to this, what we can do is first create a new variable, and we'll just call this params. And then what we want to do is set this equal to what is called the use route. And then on here, we have access to a bunch of information pertaining to that particular route. And what we want to do is gain access to the params. So inside of our template, what we can do is we can just create an H1, and we can apply a couple classes. We'll just say text 3XL like this, and we can just output the current param ID. So we can say params.id like this. So if we save that and we head over to the application, you can see now we see 3. And if we were to go to a different route, such as the second one, we'll see 2. Now, instead of storing all of our params inside of a single variable, what we can do instead is destructure the response to get back those individual params that the route has. So instead of just saying params like this, we can destructure the response and just say ID. So now that we have access to an ID, what we can do is use this endpoint right here to get a single recipe. So we can copy this, and back inside of our file, we can use the useFetch composable to fetch that single recipe. So we'll say const, and then we'll destructure our response, and we'll get back the data and the error, and then we'll set this equal to await, and then we'll use the useFetch, and then we'll paste in our URL. And what we want to do is dynamically pass in our route ID. So instead of having quotes, we can use backticks, and then where we have the 1, we can replace this with a money sign and our brackets, and we can just pass in our ID like this. And back here inside of the application, if we were to open up the Nuxt Dev Tools and we go to our payload, you can see that we have all the information pertaining to that specific recipe. Now again, with our fetch request, we want to make sure we have this type properly. So what we want to do is import our recipe type from our types file. So at the very top, we'll say import, and then we'll do type, and this is going to be the recipe type, and this is from our type files. And with that imported, we just want to copy this type, and then we want to assign it to our useFetch request. Now for the markup and styling, again, we're just going to head over to GitHub and copy and paste that in. So here inside of the GitHub repo, we can select on the recipe route, and then we have our id.view file, and we can just copy this template here. And then we can just replace this entire template with what we copied over from GitHub. And everything within the markup is things we have already done. So we have a very similar section to our recipe card with all the information pertaining to the cook time, the calories per serving, the rating and review count. Then we have the image. Again, we're going to be using the Nuxt image component. And then we just have a few other sections that is going to be displaying some of the recipe information. And now back inside of the browser, if we scroll on down and we select one of our recipes, we can just select the chocolate chip cookies. And you can see it's going to take us to this individual recipe page where we have the information about that particular recipe. Right now on our project, if we enter a recipe ID that does not exist in the API, we'll just get back an empty outline of our page. Now, what would be better is if the recipe does not exist in the API, we return a 404 page not found, as well as handle any other errors that the API might return. Now within the individual recipe file, we can use the error variable that we defined earlier to see if the API has returned any errors. Now, if the error variable is true, then what we can do is we can call the createError function provided by Nuxt. And this allows us to simply create a new error. Now, this function accepts an object which we're able to define a few properties. The first property that we're going to define is the status code. And we'll set this equal to the status code that is returned by the error. Now, the second property is going to be the status message, which we can set the status message from the error as well. And now that we have this set up, if we attempt to navigate to a route that does not exist within our API, we'll then get a 404 page not found error. Now, if you do want to override the default error page, you can do so by creating a new page called error within the app directory. And within this file, we're going to want to scaffold out our normal view boilerplate. Now, the error page has a single prop called error, which contains the error information for us to handle. So within our script, what we're going to want to do is define a prop for the error object. And since we're using TypeScript again, we'll also want to make sure we type this. So we can import the Nuxt error type and then assign it to the error prop. Then we can just use the error prop to populate our custom error page. So what we'll do is we can copy over the markup from the GitHub repo, and then we can just replace the static text for the status code along with the status message with values from our error prop. And now if we attempt to navigate to a recipe that does not exist within the API, we'll see our new custom error page. In the previous lesson, we learned how to throw an error and redirect a user to an error page if we have an error with our API. Now inside of our home page, if we have an error with our API, we don't want to create a new error and direct the user to a full-on error page. And the reason why we don't want to do this is because we have other content that we're displaying on the page that isn't dependent on the API request. So what would be better in this example is if we have an error with our API, we can display that within our template. So what we can do is apply a vif directive to the grid container. And then what we can check for is to make sure we don't have an error within our API. So as long as we don't have an error, we can display our recipe cards. Now, if we do have an error, then what we want to do is just output a message saying that something went wrong. So what we can do is on our paragraph tag is we can use the velse directive to render out this paragraph tag if this statement is not true. So if we do have an error, then we're not going to render out our recipe cards. We're instead going to render out this error message. And if you wanted to, instead of outputting this custom error message, you could output the message that comes from the error variable. So now if we force our API to fail by providing it a wrong URL and we save this, now back inside of the application, you can see we're going to see our error message saying that something went wrong, to please try again later. Having good SEO is important to having your website rank well. And Nuxt makes it very easy to set your SEO meta tags using the useMeta composable. So right now on this route for our classic margarita pizza, you can see in the title tab what we have is the route or the path of this particular page. Instead of having this, what would be better is if we could include inside of the browser title tab the name of the recipe that we're currently viewing along with our website name. Now to easily implement this into the application, we can open up the Nuxt DevTools and they have a tab called Open Graph. Now this tab is going to inform us of all the tags that we want to apply to our certain page along with a brief summary of what they're doing. And at the moment, since we haven't implemented the useSeoMeta composable, we're pretty much missing every single tag that it's requiring. So what we can do is they provide a code snippet in this other tab right here, which we can copy and just paste right into our application. And back inside of our individual recipe page, we can just paste this below our error. And then what we want to do is replace all the static content with data from our API. So for example, for the title, what we can do is we can reference our data from the API. So we can say data, and we want to say .value because remember this is a ref and we're within a script. And then we have a property called name. And now that we have this set, you can see inside of the browser title, we have the name of the recipe that we're currently viewing. And what's also really nice about the Open Graph tab is that it gives us insight into how our links are going to look when we share them. So right now with the minimal information we have provided, this is how our Twitter link is going to look. We can look at Facebook and then also LinkedIn. So let's continue to fill out the rest of the details. So for this API, we don't actually get a description. So what we can just do is paste in a static description saying recipes for you to cook. And we can also change this for the OG description as well as our Twitter description. So for the OG title and then the Twitter title, we can just use what we have for our title. So this will be data.value.name. And for the OG image and Twitter image, we can just set this to be the data.value, and we have an image that gets returned back from our API, and we can just copy this and paste it in for the Twitter image as well. Now for the OG URL, we want to specify the direct path to this page. So right now we have our application deployed to localhost. So what we'll do is we can use backticks and then we'll enter our localhost URL followed by the path of recipes. And then how we have this set up is it uses the ID. So what we can do is we can say money sign and our brackets, and we can say data.value.id. And now that we have populated all of our tags, you can see the link preview for how this will look on various platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and then LinkedIn. And for our homepage, to speed things up, what we're going to do is head over to the GitHub repo and we can copy the useSeoMeta composable that we have for this page. And back inside of our index.view file, we can just paste that in. And one thing that I did make a mistake on is we want to have a slash here for the Twitter image. And for the image, we're just going to be using the hero image that we have within the home page. And one other mistake that I did notice is that we aren't actually on port 3001, we are on port 3000, so we want to change that inside of the individual recipe page as well. Alright, so to wrap up this project, we're going to do a little bit of cleanup. Now for a recipe card, it would probably be a lot better if we had this encapsulated inside of a component. So inside of our components folder, let's create a new file and we'll call this recipe card.view. And then within here, we can just scaffold out our view boilerplate. Now inside of this component, we're going to have our recipe as a prop. So what we want to do is we're going to start off by importing the type of recipe from our types file. Then we'll want to define our prop using the define prop macro. And we'll call this prop recipe, and then we want to assign it to the type that we imported called recipe. And within the index.view file, we can just copy the markup for our recipe card and we can paste it within our new component. And then we'll just want to remove the v4 directive as we're going to be iterating over this within our index.view file still. And since the param that we had within our index.view file was recipe and then our prop is called recipe, we don't need to make any modifications to how we're referencing our data here inside of this component. And now within the index.view, we can remove the markup for our recipe card, and now we can just use our recipe card component. And what we'll want to do is apply our v4 loop as well as define our proper recipe, and we'll set this equal to the param that we have in the v4 loop called recipe. And here in the application, nothing should have changed, but what we did is instead of having all this markup sit inside of our file, we have now encapsulated our logic into a component which we could reuse throughout our application. Now in this project, we have a few times where we use this markup right here to create ourselves a button. And very similar to how we created a component for the recipe card, it would probably be a good approach to create a component for our button. So within the components folder, let's create a new file for this button and we'll call this base btn. And within this file, we just want to scaffold out our new view boilerplate. And for this component, we're going to have two props. One's going to be for the label and the other one's going to be the to prop, which will be the to attribute that we have on the NuxtLink component. So back inside of a recipe card component, we can just copy the markup we have for our current button and we can paste that here inside of our base button component. And what we'll want to do is replace the to prop on the NuxtLink component with the to prop that is being defined here inside of our script. So we can remove this and just replace this with to. And for the content of the button, we can just use the label prop. And if you wanted to make this button a little bit more dynamic, we could also wrap our label prop inside of a slot tag. And what this will allow you to do is if you wanted to customize the button, maybe you wanted to add an icon or do something like that, you could pass in a slot, and then what'll happen is it'll override the default value that we have set here with that slotted content. And back within our recipe card component, instead of having all this markup like we do right now, we can replace this with our base button component, and then we can just apply the props. So the first one we want to apply is going to be our to prop, and then we also want to provide the label. So we can say label, and we can set this to view. And again, here inside of our application, you can see nothing has changed, but now we have encapsulated even more logic into a component, and we can reuse this throughout our application in the various spots that we are using a button. Alright, so that's going to be everything we'll cover here inside of this crash course. Now, if you do want to continue learning more about Nuxt and build some cool full stack projects with Nuxt and Supabase, then be sure to head over to learnnuxt.dev and join the course in early preview. But anyways, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this and found it helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.